Welcome to Running for Real, a global community with a shared love and curiosity for running. Together we reconnect with the reasons why we love to run and discover ways it helps us become better people. Whether it's the quiet moments of a morning run while the rest of the world still sleeps, or befriending the strangers next to you at the start line of a race, we are here to connect with others who see running as the common thread that weaves our lives together. Come join me, Tina Muir, as I talk with people from all walks of life, united by a love of running. Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 330 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm excited that you are here and excited to welcome our guest today. Now, Brodie Sharpe is someone I have been admiring for a while now with what he has been able to do within the running community through his Run Smarter online website, the Run Smarter series, and his podcast, which you may or may not have come across, which has done very well. And he has continued to impress me with his Run Smarter resources, with the Run Smarter podcast, and everything he's doing to help with our community in terms of injuries. Now, today we are talking about various types of injuries, what you can do, but actually we're focusing mostly on the mental side of things, the frustration of becoming injured, what we need to learn from injuries, why we struggle to learn from injuries. We're going to talk a little bit about personality traits and how they connect into those of us that do get injured. And this is something that even if you aren't someone who is training hard enough to potentially get injured, I think there's a lot in here that is beneficial, but especially if you are training hard for something, and especially if you are someone that finds that you do tend to get injured, this is going to be an episode for you. Brodie is fantastic in the way that he explains things really clearly, really concisely, and it just makes it simple for us to really digest the information and actually be able to make it into change that can hopefully prevent it from happening maybe a little bit less in the future. Now, without any further ado, I just want to take a moment to thank one of our sponsors. That we right to the episode with Brodie Sharpe. Thank you to Oladance for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. Now, you've heard me recently talking about Oladance, which are these amazing running earbuds that you can gift for loved ones for the holidays, for Christmas, for New Year's, for anything coming up in the new year, whatever way you celebrate. And their open earbuds give you true comfort. And I can really attest to this. These are for podcast listeners, for runners, for those of you who, like me, love to jump around and dance in your kitchens, for when you're doing chores, for when you are going from a walk to a run. It doesn't give you that vibrating feeling that I used to really dislike in the past, that felt like my bones were rattling. There is none of that. This is superior sound without the bone rattling, without the vibrating. It is really clear whether you're walking, whether you're running, whether you're dancing, whether you're jumping, whether you're anything else that you could be doing, and working too. There is no ear fatigue. These sit comfortably, and if you wear headphones for more than 2 hours a day, Oladance is a must-have. Now, I mentioned these are open ear. So that open ear design means that they don't enter your ear, so there's no ache inside your ear, which is just a horrible feeling. They are secure, they stay firm in your ears, and you can also hear outside sound. So for us as runners, that means we stay safe because we don't lose track of what's happening around us. We are able to stay in the moment, enjoying what we're listening to, while also be able to hear noises like cars or other things that may be coming towards us, or also things like squirrels rustling in the leaves. I can hear that too when I am running with my Oladance. I can also hear clearly, even if it is windy, with the design that they have made. These are made for people who love to move, who love to be active, and listening to music, to podcasts, to whatever else, to books, while you are out there doing your stuff, which I love. Now, you, as a friend of mine, can go to oladance.com/Tina. That is oladance.com/Tina, and that will get you 20% off. Oladance.com/Tina will get you 20% off. Go check out those earbuds. They are amazing. I am loving them, and I can't wait to hear how much you are loving them too. Brodie, welcome to the Running for Real podcast. I am excited that you are here.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And people are going to immediately have loved the accent and be like, right, now I get to enjoy it. Although I don't know if I've ever said this when you've heard it, but I never, ever, ever get asked if I'm British over here. I always get asked if I'm Australian every time.
Interesting.
And, I don't know what it is. It must be like Australian is some like weird blend of the UK and America in terms of accents. I suppose it probably is, but so I'll be interested to hear if people say they can tell a difference between my accent and yours, because I could definitely hear it. It isn't too far off.
Yeah, I think when I was in the US, I got Australian, but I also got British as well. So I guess there's something there. There's something to do with the connection that people resonate with.
Yep. Okay, so I want to begin by talking about some of the things that you have done over the last primarily 3 to 4 years, because while nothing is an overnight success, you are a physio. And actually, let's begin, if you don't mind, by explaining, as we have mostly an American audience, what is the difference between a physio that they might hear about, and especially if you've spent time in the US, you also know physical therapist or athletic trainer are also the words used. What's the difference there?
I don't think there's too much of a difference. I obviously haven't been a trained PT, so I haven't gone through their universities or college and know exactly what they study. But from what I can see from an outsider perspective, it's extremely similar. They look at managing injuries, treating injuries, look at preventing injuries, those sorts of things, and just have a really nice insight into certain conditions and mobility, flexibility, strength and conditioning, those sort of aspects that comes with recovering injuries. So I think there is a slight difference with physiotherapists, particularly based in the UK and Australia, as we are also qualified to work in hospitals, like work with alongside nurses and doctors and those who have been admitted to hospital to help their cardiovascular system or nervous system and so some of those type of things. But we kind of have 2 directions to go. And once we graduate from physio, we can either work in hospitals and do the healthcare side of things, or we can work with the private sector, which is mainly like a clinical therapist, or work with team sports. And so we have those 2 directions that we tend to head in. But from what I can see, a PT in the US would only just focus on that private population, looking at the athletic population, injuries, those sorts of things.
Yeah. So kind of a good representative for the whole healthcare system anyway, as a whole. Okay, so I mentioned you're a physio. You are the host of the Run Smarter podcast, also the CEO and founder of the Run Smarter series, and you now have a book. Congratulations, Run Smarter, which is awesome, and I'm excited for you. As I said, as I was beginning to say before I got distracted, it can sometimes seem like people pop out of nowhere, like they have kind of risen overnight success, and there isn't really a truly overnight success. But you have done very well, considering you kind of stepped into the podcast space, really started upping your game in 2019. I'm curious for you, like what has it been like coming into this space, but particularly podcasting? I would imagine when you came in, there was some, I don't know about like intimidation factor, but I know when I started podcasting, I was trying to copy what the others were doing. Did you feel that at all? Or what was it like stepping into the podcast space? Because you managed to slot in seamlessly.
It is an interesting, like you started off as never an overnight success, because actually before the Run Smarter podcast, I actually had another podcast, which you can't find anymore because I took it down. It was called the Everyday Running Legends podcast, where I just interviewed like runners who had interesting stories. And I just would just go online on Zoom, chat with someone who either done a really difficult race or someone who's raising money for charity, or just like, someone who has a really nice mindset around running. And every sort of conversation I had, you could learn around that. It was more motivational, inspirational, that type of thing. And I was just the interviewer, just asking questions, and only because I just loved running and wanted to, just put some content out there, increase my motivation. And so that went on for about a year and a half, 2 years. I think I got to maybe 150 episodes or something like that. But, trickled in terms of numbers, didn't really grow. I had maybe like 150 listeners consistently throughout that time, didn't really expand. But really switched gears when I started working for myself and started, mingling with a lot of runners and saying there's a lot of information that runners need to know. There's a lot of misconceptions and myths out there about reducing risk of injury. And at the time, being a physiotherapist, I was doing a deep dive into the research around what pops up, why people get injured, what reduces risk of injury, how can you increase your running performance safely. And I was reading a whole bunch of the opposite. I'm like, okay, let's me, instead of just be primarily an interviewer, just asking questions, let me educate, because I do like educating people, and started doing interviews, interviewing researchers and that sort of stuff, but also did the solo episodes where educated runners, okay, this is how to run smarter, and all of my products and social media and all that sort of stuff just hovers around that run smarter term, because that's what I think runners need. And if runners want to learn how to run smarter, then, that title sort of encapsulates that whole thing.
Yeah. And I love that you started off straight. I mean, you said you had other podcasts, and quickly, why did you take that down?
I took it down mainly because once I stopped doing it, I was actually going to do one episode of the old podcast and one episode of the new podcast, and realized I tried to juggle both of them at the same time. I realized quickly, okay, I need to put all my energy into this new one. I have a lot more passion for it. It's gaining a lot more traction. I love being an educator and wanted to commit more time, and I actually started releasing 2 or 3 episodes a week for the first 15 weeks. And so we're quickly at 260 odd episodes. And so that launched up really quickly. And once I'm like, oh no, but I'll keep the Everyday Running Legends just hovering in the background, just in case someone just finds it and enjoys it. But then I just didn't get the downloads. No one was listening to it. So I'm like, okay, they all just jumped ship and turned into my new podcast. And so I'm like, there's no point of being there. So I just took it down.
Okay, fair enough. I think at some point people may be maybe it's right now, they might be like, oh, actually, I'd love to hear that. So I used to do a offshoot of my podcast called Tina for Real, where I just talk about something that people would ask me about, or I would have a 5-minute chat on something each day. And I ended up stopping doing it. It was a bit too much. I was doing it 5 or 7 days a week. Can't remember, with a new baby at the time. And then I took it down, and people still to this day are like, where did that go? Bring it back. And I'm like, no, sorry. It's hidden away. So yeah, you may get people asking for it back. So yeah, you came in having had some podcast experience, but you came in doing these solo episodes as well as interviews with experts, which at that point maybe you were used to. Was it intimidating doing the solo episodes, knowing that it's a bit different talking one-on-one to a runner, whereas I would imagine being someone who is an expert yourself, you're kind of putting yourself out there of someone who could always poke holes and be like, well, actually, that's not true.
Yeah, absolutely right with that. It was just a different cap that I had to put on, and I was a bit nervous because it was unfamiliar to me. I had to, it's so easy just to interview people and just ask questions and, just take that interview in whatever direction it goes in, and to actually position myself as the expert and start educating. I was fine being an educator in person because I had taught some physios when I was an employee. When new physios came in, I was always the one to teach them. I love doing that. But on a podcast, it's like, okay, this is going out to a lot of people, and it's a different cap that I'm just not used to. So definitely, but quickly found my feet. It's just putting yourself out of your comfort zone and, just learning a new skill. Once you're successful with stepping out your comfort zone, then your comfort zone gets bigger. Similar when I very first started being interviewed on other podcasts as an expert, I was really nervous, and that quickly you overcome it. You have a great experience. You're confident in what you teach, and that confidence grows.
For someone who struggles getting out of their comfort zone and they hear they get opportunities, maybe not like being on a podcast or hosting, or could be hosting their own podcast about a passion of theirs, or just something, even if it's just going up to someone at a social event to say, hi, my name is whatever. What do you tell yourself in that moment before you do those kind of leap out of your comfort zone things?
I think it's like, just don't die wondering. Like if you have someone, there was like some people, like if I'm adding a sporting event and there's someone who's like kind of famous that you want to say hi to, or if there's like, those sort of opportunities, it's like you're going to die wondering if you don't do that thing. You're going to be kicking yourself the next day being like, oh, I should have done that. And so if it doesn't go as well as you thought, you're like, hey, I tried, and you don't die wondering. It's a really nice position to put yourself in. Just ask yourself, would I be kicking myself tomorrow if I didn't do that thing?
That's a good reminder. That's a really great advice. You came into the podcast world with the Run Smarter podcast, and people have really gravitated towards it. Running is, and I know this from having my community for over 5 years, maybe 7 years at this point, that injuries are the thing that you can always find people who want to talk about it. You can always have things coming up. What have been some of the challenges with kind of solidifying yourself as the person to learn from in the injury space of running?
The challenges would be, I guess, potentially like changing your opinion on certain topics as you interview more people, more research. Research is always being released, and you can start to shift your narrative on certain opinions. What I don't like when I listen to health professionals is when there's some new evidence that comes forth and they sort of double down on themselves if it's against what their belief is. And so they say, oh no, you can't listen to that because, and they'll come up with a huge list. That one piece of paper isn't going to be enough to skew your whole narrative, but at least consider it on all the other literature that's been involved. Like one of the first running research courses I took, it was by a company in Canada. They're called the Running Clinic, and they came down to New Zealand to teach people about running. And I was a couple of years out of physio, and I was really impressed because they change their course content every year based on new evidence and new research that comes out. And I just really love that idea, and have struggled with, maybe in the early days having some opinion about something and then slowly shifting my narrative to be like, hey, you know what, maybe there's more to this. Maybe there's more of a holistic approach. And that's been something I've gravitated towards as I interview psychologists, pain specialists, chronic pain sort of experts, and thinking that there's a lot more to running than just training loads. It's something that's a lot more broad, and we need to consider a lot more factors. But the other thing that I find really challenging is tending to like have a helpful debate on my podcast when my guest has a different opinion. I'd like to. I find I'm a bit too agreeable sometimes, and I just go along with it, and like, oh yeah, and then my audience would say, hey, but do you actually believe that? Where's like a little bit of your ideas, or pushing back a little bit, just in a healthy way, but something I really find challenging that I'm trying to work on myself. But just always just trying to better myself.
Yeah, I've had that quite a few times where for me, it usually comes around because this is a passion area of mine, when someone will say something about losing weight or about a race weight or something like that. And I kind of like twitch a little bit, like, oh, don't say that, please. But then I can never, not never, sometimes I do. Sometimes you can't quite bring yourself to be like, oh, well, what about this? And then afterwards, as you said, die wondering, you kick yourself. You're like, oh, I should have at least asked them, because then they could have had a reason back to that, or maybe not. But yeah, that is definitely challenging. What do you wish runners knew, about any element that you come across working with runners with injuries?
It's hard to come up with just one. Like I've got so many running misconceptions that I like to push back on, that people, it's like of disservice to them. Like they're doing there's certain misconceptions out there that people believe that's actually like causing them to get injured in the first place. Like an example would be...
give us like 3 or 4 or whatever.
Yeah. So people think that they get injured because they have flat feet. Not the case. Research doesn't show that. People think they get injured because they don't stretch enough. Research will show that's not the case. And in fact, when it comes to it being detrimental to your running, that particular belief, people think that, okay, I'm getting injured because I'm not that flexible and I don't stretch enough. And that's what they believe, but they're not going to stretch because they don't like stretching. Like they're the type of runner that won't ever do it, but they're convinced that they're getting injured because they don't stretch enough. But what they fail to realize is, something else in their training. They're not focusing on anything else in their training that might be causing their injury, but like they might be not getting enough sleep or overtraining or like, increasing their intensity too much, but they're not focusing on those changes because they think it's just because they don't stretch. And so that's where you need to educate.
Is that like it's an easy thing to blame, like
it could be, yeah. Or there's just they could have been told in the past that or they might have been told by a health professional or a coach, or they might have read a blog that says,
I see.
All runners should stretch. I'm not sure where that belief generated from, but it's a pretty common one.
Thank you to Athletic Greens for partnering with Running for Real and myself and allowing us to continue the work that we are doing. Now, today, I want to talk to you about Athletic Greens. This time of year, it is especially important to consider this because not only are you getting 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, and whole food source ingredients, this comprehensive nutrition in one single scoop, which is how I start my day every day. Even if I'm going immediately out the door on a run, it doesn't upset my stomach. It just is an ideal way to start my day. You're also building a daily habit in 1 minute, and it's going to promote your gut health, support your immunity, boost your energy, and more. Not only those things, but with your order, when you sign up through my code by going to athleticgreens.com/Tina, you are going to get a 1-year free supply of vitamin D3 and K2 plus 5 free travel packs. The vitamin D element is so important this time of year for most of us. We are coming into the winter. This is a time when our vitamin D levels drop. And if you let your vitamin D levels drop too much, it's going to wreak havoc with your training and with your life. It really is so important for us to keep that, as we are not getting the vitamin D exposure from the sun. And I love that Athletic Greens has decided that they are going to give us the opportunity to put those two things together so you have everything you need in one scoop. I love having it every morning. I know it is going to take care of my gut, take care of my immunity, boost my energy, and help with recovery through superfoods, adaptogens, and antioxidants. It's like your insurance policy. So no matter what you eat in that day, you know you have given your body nutrient-dense foods, you have taken care of it, and you can go about your day and enjoy this season. So go to athleticgreens.com/Tina to check it out. That's athleticgreens.com/Tina. I think just being someone who has always struggled with those little things to keep you injury free, but also, performance related. I wonder how much of it is, even though we know a lot of the time the actual answer is sleep, a lot of the time with recovery, that it seems so much harder to really commit to sleep and say, like, you don't want sleep to be the answer because you're like, no, please, I don't want to go to bed at 7 p.m. Like, I can't, that's the one thing we don't want to be told it is. And also the additional thing of once you start worrying about sleep and like, I got to get to bed, then you can't sleep and then you get yourself even more stressed out. And so, yeah, I think we kind of want something that can be blamed. That is something that you can change yourself, but only if you have the motivation to do it. And if you don't, then you're like, well, I could if I wanted to, when actually the sleep would be the critical, or nutrition would be the critical piece.
Yeah. Or it might seem too daunting. Like if it is training load, then I need to log my training, or then I need to plan this out, or I need to hire a coach, or like there's obstacles there that might be too great, seemingly too great to, pursue, or people are looking for quick fixes. People want, like, if you have plantar fasciitis and you had it for 5 years, then just get this massage ball under your foot and that will make things better. And you see these blogs of, prevent or overcome your plantar fasciitis in 20 minutes. And like, there'll just be a gimmicky sort of thing. And that's what people gravitate towards. They want that simple fix. And sometimes that's not the case. Most of the time it's not the case. Prevent
it with a little asterisk of will last 4 minutes and then it will be back.
Correct.
Okay. So thank you for sharing that. Let's kind of go into the book a little bit more. I want to first start by just going a little bit into your history. You began running yourself in 2015 in a pretty common way to begin, with signing up for a race with who happened to be your sister with someone else and kind of getting hooked from there. From what I've read, you talked about feeling a lot of frustration with injuries. When you look back on that time now, what were some of the errors you were making early on that in the end have kind of directed your career, but at the time were just little blips of something that being a runner involved?
It was training errors that were pretty common amongst runners. I was starting to train for a half marathon. I thought I was pretty fit. I actually had a career in basketball where I was training quite at a high level and thought I could handle a lot more running than I actually could. The slow endurance, prolonged kind of running was not what I was used to. I was used to sprinting, jumping, landing, changing direction, all that sort of stuff. And my mileage, looking back on now, my mileage increased way too much. I think I was running too fast. I didn't learn how to run slow, which takes runners a long time to do. Some runners takes them 6 to 12 months to be like, oh, is this what running slow is actually meant to be like? And so I never realized how long or what running slow meant and what the benefits of running slow actually was. Because every time I just wanted to go a little bit further, go a little bit faster. And also at the same time, I then looked at my other friends who were runners and posting on Strava and those sorts of things. And every run that I did, I'm like, okay, I want to impress my friends. Let me make sure that it's post worthy. And so every run needed to be like a challenge. Every run needed to be trying my best. And, I was a physio. I didn't know a lot about running at that stage. I was more of your general kind of physio, but I was getting injuries left, right, and center. I was preparing for this half marathon underdone because injuries were dictating my running volume rather than me dictating my running volume. And so, looking back now, some clear signs, clear mistakes, even based on the foundation fitness that I thought I had.
How do you keep connected to those as you move further and further away from that point, like the empathy for those mistakes?
Well, you learn from your mistakes, hopefully. A lot of runners don't, but, you want to try and find, okay, what got me injured in the first place? And I've recognized that now and trying to learn from every little injury and every little injury that pops up. Like if you overtrain and you're not going to get ITB syndrome, a calf strain and a hamstring tendinopathy at the same time. Like your weak link will reveal itself first. And so you then sort of reveal, okay, this is a weak link of mine that I need to strengthen. And the first injury that popped up for me, it wasn't an injury, but I had my calves were so sore when I first started running. That was just because they weren't used to the long duration stuff. But my first actual injury was my knee patellofemoral pain, so pain around my kneecap. And that was actually an injury that I had in my basketball days and hadn't had it for, a year, but it resurfaced when I started running because that was my weak link. And so that's also another lesson to learn. Okay, this is my weak link. Let me make it my strongest link possible with strength training and all that sort of stuff and have that insight. You learn from those mistakes.
Yes. Even though it can be challenging to really take those messages on board. But that's exactly what I think people have really appreciated and enjoyed about what you're doing is that the way you talk about this is very real and fair and with empathy. And, it's much needed, because sometimes professionals in the space can be quite condescending or quite like just don't understand runners and think, oh, you're just dumb, like just stop doing the same thing and just don't get it. And so I think that's something that people have really appreciated about you. I'm curious because I had this conversation earlier today based on Lauren Fleshman's book that I was fortunate enough to have an advanced copy of. She talked in the book about when people have injuries that are requiring chunks of time off. She talked about the danger of, or how cross-training and cross-training combined with restricted eating, which is something people often do when they get injured, is just potentially career-ending, but very, very damaging. And when I look back to my career, during periods of injury, that was when I restricted a lot in my eating, but also when I went crazy cross-training. I'd love to hear your perspective of that in terms of, do you think sometimes when we do get injured, cross-training, when people cross-train, it does more harm than good in terms of preventing recovery from happening?
When you talk about cross-training, are you referring to like a cardio alternative, like elliptical or
like
bike
elliptical,
and that sort of stuff?
pool running, bike,
Yeah. I don't think it would. I find it hard to think there would get to a point where it'd be detrimental, but you do need to return to running at some stage. Like if you stop running, then that deconditions you to running. So usually when you are injured, you do want to either maintain whatever running you can tolerate. And, there's a 100 ways we can talk about that. But if you do need to take some time off running, completely off running, because any little minimal amount will exacerbate symptoms or, not contribute towards recovery, then cross-training can be very useful. Cross-training can be good to preserve your cardiovascular fitness and preserve sort of like some muscle strength, depending what the cross-training option that you choose. But at the same time, it's also preserving some of the strength. Like let's just say we use the elliptical trainer. Not a lot of work on the calves because you're not really pushing off that much, but you're getting some cardiovascular fitness. You're a whole body workout. You're sort of preserving as best you can, but you can't just do the cross trainer for 4 to 6 weeks and then expect to be back to running what you were pre-injury. It's just not as simple as that. So I usually find people get really stuck if they don't have a cross-training alternative when they are injured to the point where they have to stop running, because then mentally it's really challenging for them. And they either, those runners, most of us, we run because we love it. We run for mental health. We run for, it just makes us feel better. And then when that's taken away because of injury and you can't do any sort of running, it's a challenging identity crisis. It's a challenging mental battle. And if you don't have a cross-training alternative, you're more likely to return back too soon, return back too quickly, do it too much, too intense, and the injury flares up again. And so it's really tricky to navigate. But I do talk about on my podcast a lot of times trying to find out what acceptable levels of symptoms are, to find out if you can still run, to find out if you do need some cross-training, like what is the symptom behavior to dictate what you should and shouldn't do. So I do think it can be quite useful. If someone's a triathlete and they're injured, there's usually a number of things that you can do: strength, cycle, swim, run, to keep your fitness up, even accelerate your fitness without exacerbating the symptoms. So having those options there can be a good thing as well.
Thank you for that. And I just want to clarify that it wasn't, she was saying like, don't cross train. It was more that sometimes people get carried away with it and go so hard at cross training because they're scared of losing any little bit of fitness during recovery periods. But I think, you still, I think that's maybe where my viewpoint is a bit tinted, because that was very much my experience. But I think maybe the average person probably doesn't go to the point where they, spend 3 hours in the pool, going up and down pool running like myself or Lauren might have. Okay, so I want to move on to something on a similar topic. You have a chapter in your book about personality traits and injury risk. So I would love to go into some of those. We love the mental side of things here, and that's always been my fascination. What are some things you notice in terms of personality traits?
Oh, so we didn't get this at the start, but I'm an online physio that just works with runners around the world. And so I am constantly talking to injured runners. I have a free 20-minute injury chat with my link in my show notes and that sort of stuff. So I'm on, 3 or 4 chats a day with different runners just talking about their injuries. And I get a very fascinating look into personalities, and if they ever come on as a client, and even deeper insight into their personalities. And so it is, it's an interesting career. I've chosen an interesting population to work out all those personalities, but I can refer back to research that I mentioned in the book. There is a link between personality traits and your risk of injury. And most of the research will focus around, competitiveness and perfectionism and those sorts of things. And one particular study just did a survey, just looking at like a personality trait kind of survey, where they looked at perfectionism, and they separated that umbrella term of perfectionism into perfectionistic strivings, which would be like I strive to be the best, all that sort of stuff, and perfectionistic concerns. So the perfectionistic concerns would be like, I am worried if I get injured, I'll let down my teammate, or I'm worried about what people will think of me if I can't perform, or those sorts of things. Those are concerns, perfectionistic concerns, and they showed that there is a huge correlation with perfectionistic concerns and your likelihood of getting injured. And so looking at runners in general, type A personalities, very driven, self-motivated, sometimes data-driven, like we like analytics, we like to look at progress, we like goals, we like all those sorts of things. Fantastic traits to have if you have a marathon and it's winter and you have to get up in the morning, you have to go for a run, you're self-motivated and driven to do that. Perfect. But I do mention in the book, there is scenarios where those same personality traits can then be of disservice to you. So, you can easily say perfectionism, or let's just say motivation. You're highly motivated, fantastic. But if you're injured, sometimes that motivation can be a bit too much. Like you can be too motivated and run through an injury, run through pain, say, oh, you know what? I'm tough. I can, it's only just this minor shin pain. I can run through a lot of pain. And it ends up just disserving you because you're irritating that structure. But, it can get to the point where it gets so severe that you have to really take time off, and then you're really irritated yourself. You're sort of like kicking yourself. I have this chapter in the book, or a section in the book, called The Self-Sabotaging Runner. And it is just a crazy cycle that a lot of runners can resonate with, of knowing you've done too much, you've run through pain, you've ignored it, you probably shouldn't have, and now you have to take some time off running. You're kicking yourself because you're like, I shouldn't have done that. And you're letting pain sort of dictate that and take time off. But then as soon as you're like 3 days pain-free, you're trying to run 10K, and then you exacerbate those symptoms again, just because you're like, finally, I'm back. Let's go. I've wasted so much time. I need to catch up on my training plan. Let's dive in. And you exacerbate symptoms again. And again, you kick yourself. You're like, damn it, I knew I'd done too much. Like, obviously it was too much. I wasn't ready for that. And you just go through this really crazy cycle. And the amount of times I have clients where I say, let's stick to this plan. It's a conservative plan, but you need it. Let's build it up. And we have this plan in place and say, this is great. I'm following this plan. I'm getting better. As soon as they have 1 or 2 really good weeks, they throw that plan out the window. They sign up for a marathon that's in 3 months, and they're like, what do you think? Can I do this? And, this is what got them in that place, into that situation in the first place. It's, a bit too much drive. It's a bit too much competitiveness and motivation. It's just that little bit too much excitement for the sport, which we love. We want people to love the sport, but when it's to your detriment, especially if it's a constant pattern, a behavioral pattern based on your personality, we need to be very, very careful.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a lot of people listening will resonate with that. I think that's such a common thing to talk about. And I feel like I'm slowly moving away from that personality trait. But I know many of those things you said there, I have been guilty of and done. And it's easy to do. It really is.
You had an episode recently about why is it so hard to take a rest day? And like, why is it so hard to take a rest day? It's really... Runners, like they want to run far. Sometimes they want to run fast and they want to run every day. And it's very hard for your bodies to tolerate that. And when you're not running, you feel like you're lazy. You feel like you should be more active. You should be more healthy. And the more you do, the more that sort of reference point of what baseline fitness is like rises. So you can run every single day and be like, no, but I'm not running. I could run more. This is only just my baseline level of fitness. I want to run twice a day or, something crazy. But it's just what we do to ourselves.
Thank you to Allbirds for sponsoring this episode of the Running For Real podcast. You have heard me talking about Allbirds all year. It has been one of my favorite partnerships. I have not come across a pair of shoes that I didn't love, and I am on to about 8 or 9 different pairs at this point. Really, it would be hard. You'd be hard pressed to find me in a pair of shoes where I'm not wearing Allbirds, and that is because every pair has been so comfortable and just... there's a pair for every occasion. I love it. Now, I've mentioned to you a lot about the Tree Flyers. Those are my running shoes. I wear them most days of the week for my runs, and I have done 3 marathons in them. I've done an ultra in them, and they are my workout shoes. They're my everything shoe. I really love them. I love the energy that Allbirds is putting into making truly sustainable products and always pushing ahead to make them more and more closer to being totally having no effect environmentally in terms of what they are putting in through natural materials, but also the work that they are putting in as a company to make change happen in our world. I want to go over some of my other favorites. Now, first I want to say, if you are looking for a gift for a loved one in your life or for yourself, or you haven't tried Allbirds yet and you're wondering what to do, I would start with the Tree Dasher. That is the shoe that you can run in. It can definitely handle runs. I've done many runs in my pair, but they are also ideal for spending all day on your feet. They're ideal day-to-day shoes. They have all kinds of beautiful colors, and they're very, very, very comfortable. So that is where I would probably start. I also really do love the wool runner-up mizzles. So that mizzles, whenever you see mizzles with anything Allbirds, that means that they are water repellent or like can handle being in the rain. Not fully, you couldn't go jump in puddles and they would be fine, but they definitely can handle rainy days. And so I love the high top versions. I just think those look really cool. I also love the wool loungers. Those are ideal I wear them on evenings out. I even wore them to a dinner where I went for a very, very fancy restaurant. I wore those and I felt perfectly comfortable in those, the wool runners. My kids love the small birds. I have multiple pairs of them for each. They are adorable. And I also really love the plant leather shoes, which are called the Plant Pacers. I wear those on a day-to-day basis as well. So those are just a few ideas for you. Go to allbirds.com to go check those out and get those for the loved ones in your life. I have certainly got lots of gift ideas and gifts from Allbirds, and you should take advantage too. Yeah, I definitely understand that right now with, I'll quite often say to people right now, well, I'm only running 30 to 50 miles a week because I'm comparing them to my 90 days. But then people are like, what do you mean only? Like, what does that even mean only? And I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, sorry, perspective. But I do think I've recently been getting more insight into, I think I always thought that people would look at runners, and they do, and say, wow, you're so committed, you're so dedicated, it's amazing. But there's also a part of the everyday non-runner who thinks like, wow, they really care about that a lot. Kind of almost to a like, are they okay? kind of level. Like, do they need a hug? It is quite funny how, desperate we are to get back out there. What about the relationship between nutrition and injuries here? I obviously know you're not a dietitian, so you can't speak to specific food groups or anything like that. But the more and more research I have done and the more reading and learning from experts about Red S, what used to be the female athlete triad, but now has expanded to men and got lots more symptoms, the more I'm realizing that nutrition and specifically kind of a lack of fueling when people are trying to lose weight while running or trying to hit their goals and want to look a certain way. That is a huge part of at least the major injuries you were talking about that require, significant amounts of time off. How have you come into that in the work that you've done? And then what do you you obviously don't want to, that's not your area of expertise. How do you handle that when it does come up?
I don't like to give out specific advice. I do interview dietitians on the podcast because I don't have the training in it. But when it comes to the global equation of running-related injuries, we are looking at overtraining versus under-recovery. And so you can overtrain and symptoms can, flare up something, the likelihood of an injury can increase. But you can also keep your training load consistent and still get an overload injury if that other side of the equation, that recovery, you start under-recovering. And so under-recovering, that will cover sleep, nutrition, hydration, stress, those sort of areas of your life outside of those training volumes, because people say, I'm increasing by 10% a week. I'm conservative. I don't do a lot of speed work, but how did I end up with this injury? Well, maybe you didn't sleep too well over the last couple of weeks. Maybe you've been stressed. Maybe you've haven't been eating the right stuff. Like, your nutrition are your building blocks to recovery. And what I like to highlight a lot of times on my podcast is you don't get stronger during your hard workouts. You get stronger after your hard workouts once you get adequate recovery. It's that adaptation cycle that you need to become a better athlete. And that recovery afterwards means fueling, means getting the right essential building blocks to recover. It's very, very simple if you look at it, that equation. But your point about the Red S, like, if you're fueling, if you're trying to increase your mileage, your recovery needs to match that. And that can be by enhancing your nutrition with better, more nutrient-dense foods, or just trying to supply your body with what it requires. Because if you don't, which is where the situation with Red S comes into it, if you're training hard and you're not fueling yourself accordingly, your body's going to prioritize getting that energy source from somewhere. It needs to get it from somewhere. And so what it does is say, okay, I'm not getting it from the intake of food. Where else can I extract these nutrients? Oh, we've got a liver here. We have the digestive system. We have bones. We have muscle. And you can start extracting a lot of essential nutrients from those things. And that's where people can get, hormonal issues or some sort of digestive issues or stress fractures. It's just because the body's extracting all those minerals that causes that dysfunction. And so obviously fueling, very, very important, it needs to match your training, and your body will tell you. You'll start getting tired. You'll start becoming lethargic. Your energy for training just diminishes. You might start getting some pains or hormonal issues or stress fractures, and sometimes they're like the signs that picked up way too late, but sometimes they're the first things to reveal themselves.
Absolutely. And as you said, those warning signs are the critical pieces that we sometimes don't pay attention to. I'm curious with running has been touted and celebrated and talked about again and again as a weight loss tool. Like, people, it constantly gets circulated around of like, if you want to lose weight, go to running. If you want to lose weight, go to running. And so it starts people off in a culture that tells them this is a weight loss tool. This is the way to look the way you want to look. This is the way to eat whatever you want to eat and not feel guilty about it. I would imagine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's got to be quite frustrating at times in terms of what we were just talking about there with Red S, with not eating enough, with people who keep getting injured. And it's because they're trying to go by the 1,500 calories a day while also running because they think it's a shortcut to weight loss. How do you handle that? Like, does that come up often? And has it in many ways done more harm than good, knowing that running is kind of the number one way for the people use to lose weight?
Yeah. To be honest, I don't get a lot of that type of population. Like, obviously the person that's going to reach out and eventually make an effort to reach out to me are the ones who are injured. It's not usually the ones who are trying to lose weight. And by that stage, they're not really, they're sort of preparing for a race, or they're not really the ones that are trying to lose weight. I get a dietitian will have a completely different skewed sort of population, but it doesn't work. Like, how many people do you know that try running and actually lose weight? Like, when I prepare for a marathon, like, how many times do you increase your training load, and you sometimes go from an off season to peak season where you're doing 2-3 times as much and your body weight stays exactly the same. It's, if anything, some people gain weight because they justify eating a lot, but it's burning the candle at both ends if you try and increase your training load and also underfuel yourself. You're just running into the worst disaster ever. It's that equation of that equation I talked about before: overtrain, under recover. You're kind of doing both of those things wrong in that equation, and you're going to lead to not only injury, but something a little bit more severe, like you say, dysfunction of like your nervous system, muscle system, your digestive system, like all of your hormones and how your body should operate starts slowly becoming dysfunctional because you're not providing what the body's asking for and craving for when you do exercise.
Absolutely. Do you think people generally, the people you work with generally do a good job of using these injuries as a moment to take stock of maybe the mistakes they've been making, or do you think that happens at a later point, kind of as they reflect over time?
I don't think they learn that much. I don't think they like learning, but they hardly self-reflect. I've seen a lot of people being like, I've listened to every 250 episodes of your podcast. I've listened, read your blogs, listened to you on this, and then they're like, yeah, but I'm injured and I've had shin splints every 6 months for the last 2 years. And you say, okay, well, talk me through it. And there's the same mistake over and over and over again. And so we're heat of the moment type of people. I think it's just humans in general, not just runners, but we live week by week. We don't really look back and say, how was my last 6 months of training? How was my last 12 months of training? How was my last 5 years of training? How many times have I been injured? What caused those injuries? How have I been performing on my A races? How many people would realistically assess that, find something that's causing those issues, and then proactively create strategies to minimize those? They're unique, those type of people that actually do that.
Yeah.
Which sometimes it just starts by just asking the question, self-reflect, because when I see an athlete and they've injured, I ask about their past history and I start asking questions to them like, okay, or I'll replay back to them what they've wrote, the forms that they've filled out, and like, okay, so you got injured 12 months ago during marathon training because you did the XYZ. Then you got injured again, marathon training for XYZ. What do you think the connection is? And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, maybe it's been too aggressive. Maybe I've done too many hills. That's where it starts revealing themselves, and it requires a lot of prompting for people to self-reflect, particularly long-term. And so sometimes it's just asking the question, and hopefully it gets people across, and then they start looking for proactive strategies to minimize that risk in the future. Makes sense on paper, but rarely does it happen.
Yeah, and I think most of us can resonate with, when you're injured, it's almost like, and I mean this in a way that, like, just being realistic with the way I was with my medical professionals. I hope this isn't the way you're treated, but I suspect it probably is. It's kind of like a, yeah. Whatever you're saying, like, ask me questions, go through my history, whatever. Give me the, what do I do? How do I fix this? Give me the answer. And you're like, I'll deal with I'll think about all that stuff later. Just tell me what I should do right now. And then I'll deal with that. When I'm healthy again, then I'll think about it. And then you just never do. So
I need to be back to pain-free running in 7 days. What can I do? It's like those sorts of questions.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. On that note, what would you like to see more or less of in the running community, other than maybe people are actually listening to your advice in their own lives?
I would say, like, runners should stop being so hard on themselves, like holding themselves to such high standards and then kicking themselves when they don't reach those standards. And I know...
You mean in terms of goals, or in terms of like training? You mean like not hitting a goal on the day, or you mean the build up, or both?
I'm talking goals. I'm talking rehab. I'm talking like recovery, those sorts of things. I think let's use some examples. So when I have an injured client and they're unable to run, they've got a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort, I ask them, okay, what's a good goal for us to work towards? And they're like, I just want to be back to running pain-free. If I'm back to running pain-free, I'll be really happy and we can launch from there. And then we get them back to running pain-free. And I'm like, oh, so this is good. They're like, yeah, nah. So they're not celebrating that small win yet. They're like, yeah, but I'm not running, like, I'm only running 20 minutes pain-free. I want to be running 10K pain-free. And then you get to 10K pain-free and like, yes, let's celebrate. They're like, no, but it's really slow. Like, I used to be really fast. And it's just one thing to another. They're hard on themselves in terms of their recovery. They're too hard on their expectations. They're too hard on, what they place upon themselves. Celebrate the small wins. There's 10 small wins in between those steps that I just talked about, but they're too hard on themselves. And so the same thing can be said for races, putting themselves, I want to get a sub 4-hour marathon. I want to get a sub 3-hour marathon, and then really kicking themselves or down on themselves when they don't reach that. But if you have an A goal, B goal, C goal, and you can like celebrate little wins and you can talk about what went well, what didn't go so well, how I can learn, what I can change, and also all those sorts of things. You want to run, you want it to be a good experience. You want it to be a helpful experience. You want it to be a positive experience. But I don't know, it's for some reason, runners are just so hard on themselves. I know you've talked about in the past, injuries for a runner, it's a part of it. It's a part of the journey. But runners have the expectation of, I just want to run and not get injured. That's my standard. And whenever I do get injured, then I am really down on myself. I've done something wrong. I'm kicking myself because I might have mistrained. But I say it, I know you've said it on your podcast, I say it a ton of times on my podcast and in my book. You shouldn't, that's an unrealistic goal. If you want to train and if you want to push the endeavors, if you have a marathon and if you have a goal, if you want to push your capabilities, then, the risk of injury isn't going to be zero. Even if you're just maintaining your fitness, the risk isn't going to be zero. But there are a lot of things that you can do to reduce your risk of injury. But if an injury does happen, it's a part of the game. Like, it's been a while since I've been injured, but I've been implementing all these strategies. And sometimes I get calf pain. Sometimes I get plantar fasciitis that flares up. It's knowing what to do in those really early moments, knowing exactly how to be proactive to negotiate that injury without losing fitness. That's my definition of injury prevention, because injuries are going to pop up. Symptoms are going to pop up because injuries are so multifactorial that we can't control everything, but learn from it, know exactly what to do, know how to interpret symptoms, return back to running symptom-free without losing fitness. That's my goal. That's what I think people should focus on. And it's reassuring in a way. So if symptoms do pop up, just let people know that's a part of the journey.
Yeah, that's such good advice. Thank you for that. And not really surprising whatsoever to hear your answer there, because that's definitely something I've noticed and I've talked about a lot as well. So I'm glad we're on the same page there. What chapters in the book have hit hard with people maybe that you didn't expect, or what have there been certain sections that people have spoken to a lot that you maybe didn't, think were going to be things that people would bring up?
Definitely the personality side of things, because people read a lot about training loads. They read a lot about, symptoms, injuries, what to do to overcome those injuries, but rarely do they look at the holistic approach, those other aspects, the sleep. We haven't really talked much about sleep right now, but, sleep is the best recovery tool you have by far. You've mentioned it a little bit, but people wake up half an hour early to foam roll before they run. And, that's a little bit backwards. I would definitely sleep for an extra half hour, because you could get all of the recovery tools you possibly know, talking massage, stretches, foam roller, massage guns, like every single thing. You can pile them on top of one another and you wouldn't get nowhere near surpassing the benefits of sleep, enhancing your sleep. And research does show that if you decrease your sleep, there was a study done on adolescents. Those who had sleep less than 7 hours had a 70% increased likelihood of getting injured than those who slept more than 7 hours. Looking at other studies on the adult population, the adult endurance athletes, so looking at cyclists, runners, triathletes, those sorts of things. If they had a 14-day lag of less than 7 hours sleep, that increased their risk of injury substantially, significant risk of injury. So that holistic stuff, when people start looking at their well-being and everyday life rather than just focusing on their running and training loads, I think people are starting to resonate with that a lot. And people are starting to recognize that it is the person as a whole rather than just running. And so, people read the book and they say, yep, I know from my podcast, they know much about symptoms. Like if you do get symptoms, what classifies as acceptable, what classifies as I'm still able to run, or I should modify my running. But those other elements, they're starting to wake up to.
Yes, I think that's so important. And we know, we've known, well, it's kind of been an ongoing conversation for a few years, but it's really getting to the forefront of people's minds that, stress is stress. Not just in the world of running, but in everything, that everything is together, that our body is affected by all kinds of things going on in our life. And it's challenging to accept that, because again, we want that quick fix of, it's just this, or, you want to keep running separate from everything else, but it definitely bleeds over into each other and affects our injuries, but also the way we feel and the way that we sleep and our mental health and all kinds of things. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the listeners, from your experience, from your work, from writing the book, whatever? Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I think people should just recognize that. I'll reiterate that equation, overtrain versus under recovery, because there's so many different elements of that equation that we can explore. You can talk about training loads, and you can talk about abrupt changes in training, which could be too much too soon, too fast, too many hills. Maybe you've changed your shoes, that you've gone for something that's a little bit too unaccustomed to what you're used to, and your transition process wasn't patient enough. Like those sort of abrupt changes all sort of impact that training side of that equation. So keep in mind, this is like a universal sort of stuff. There's tons of evidence to back it up. And that's one thing that you need to analyze, one thing you need to measure, one thing that you need to write and plan. Because if you don't have a plan, and you just say, let me see how I go for my run today. And if I feel good, I'll go far, I'll go fast. That's just too much of a gray zone for someone to that can potentially get injured and then not know why they've got injured, because they're not writing it down. They can't reflect back and say, actually, I ran 10 more kilometers this week than I did last week. And some people don't know that, or their intensity was a bit too much. They've run the same mileage, but it's just been a little bit faster for every single run. And they didn't know because they didn't measure it. So I think that physical side of things definitely need to look at. The stress side of things, the emotional side of things, the under recovery side of things. it's more subjective. You can track your sleep, you can, that sort of stuff, but just factor it in, know that it's a part of the equation, pay attention to what your quality of eating is like, what your quality of sleep is like, what your overall stress is like. We haven't really talked about stress and how it impacts, but I do mention in my book, and there are a couple of podcast episodes on it, but again, it's subjective kind of data. But if you do encounter yourself where you're moving house, or you have a death in the family, or some stressful life scenarios, then's not the time to progress your training. If you're stressed, if you're physically stressed, back off the mileage, or at least keep it consistent, but don't push. Now's not the time to push. If you've got a newborn baby and you haven't if you're not really sleeping that well, don't train for a race. You're setting yourself up for disaster. Just say, hey, now's not the time in my life that I should be pushing the envelope. Let's back off, reduce my mileage, and live to fight another day. It's those sensible decisions based on life circumstances that just lead you to having a decreased risk of injury, and you can just move forward once you do start sleeping better, once your stress is under control. That's the time to then be like, okay, let's push the envelope and let's see what we're capable of.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. You're preaching to the choir. I very much say the same thing, but I think that's so important to mention. Brodie, where can people go find you? We'll put lots of links in the show notes, but I would love for you to share for yourself where people can find you in addition to the book, which I'll put a link to.
Great. Yeah. So the book itself is called Run Smarter. The Run Smarter podcast, if people want to listen to the first 10 episodes, I cover 10 universal principles to reduce or overcome injury. So a lot of it talks about what we've talked about today, but in a little bit more detail. I've just started YouTube. If you're a YouTube goer, Run Smarter with Brodie Sharpe is my channel. And they're pretty much the main socials that people can check out.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for your time, for all that you do to make our world a better place. And I'm excited to hear what episode people dive into first from your podcast. But thank you for all that you do.
Thank you very much.
The Running for Real podcast and everything we do here at Running for Real would not be possible if it wasn't for the Running for Real team. While I am the person who you hear from most often and maybe the face of the brand, the rest of our team are such critical pieces of what we do. And without them, I think I'd just be running around in circles with ideas. So I want to take a moment to thank our team. To Jeremy Nessel, who's been with me since the very beginning. Kat McKay, Sally Pontarelli, Kelsey Wang, Sandy Gutierrez, Louise Murphy, Andrew Basola, Alexandria Will, and Maria Vargas. Thank you to each and every one of you for all that you give to Running for Real and our community. I appreciate you, and I'm so thankful for having you as a part of the team. Thank you so much for listening to that episode with Brodie. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I just admire all that he is doing, and his wife are doing it is just so genuine and pure that he really wants to help the running community, and he's prepared to work really hard with that to make it accessible for us all. So go check out his Run Smarter podcast, his Run Smarter series, the website. He has so many resources there for you to go check out. There is a lot there that you can learn from. And I hope this episode was helpful for you, even if you're not injured right now, just to think back to in future episodes. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors and remind you to go check them out. You can find links to everything Brodie and I talked about in the show notes at runningforreal.com/episode 330. And our sponsor links will also be there. I want to thank Oladance, which are my new open ear headphones that allow you to hear the outside world. So yes, they are safe for running. They go in, slip around your ear really easily. They leave your eardrum open so you can hear outside noises, but they don't bounce. They don't give you ear fatigue. They don't hurt. They don't feel like they're vibrating your bones. They're just really awesome headphones. And you can get 20% off when you go to oladance.com/Tina. That's OLADANCE.com/Tina, oladance.com/Tina. I also want to thank Athletic Greens for your support with us. This is the most critical time of year for us to be drinking and enjoying Athletic Greens. I have it every single morning with a few drops of vitamin D, which you will get a 1-year free supply when you sign up at athleticgreens.com/Tina. That vitamin D is critical for keeping away a lot of the bugs, viruses, and nastiness that is going around this time of year. So go to athleticgreens.com/Tina to get that 1 year free supply plus 5 free travel packs. And finally, to Allbirds, you know I love Allbirds. You will be hard-pressed to find me in anything but Allbirds. And I've mentioned to you some of my favorite items, but you can go to allbirds.com. That's ALLBIRDS, allbirds.com to go check out some of my favorites. And be sure to go look at those tree flyers, those on my running shoes. And I love them. You will too. Thank you so much to Brodie for the conversation today. I encourage you to sign up to our email list, runningforreal.com, to go find out more about the Red S recovery resource that is coming and I mentioned in this episode. And I will see you next week for the year-end recap before we head into 2023.